I'm going to teach you how to predict the future, and what I mean by this is how to predict the outcome of political policies and anything related to that. Why does this matter to you? Because it impacts your life in every sense of the word. The first thing you have to understand is that political policies' intent and good intentions means absolutely zero. What matters is the end result. So how can you predict the outcome of a policy? First, you have to understand that every policy creates incentives. And the second thing you have to understand is unintended consequences. Then you have to understand that there's no such thing as a solution necessarily. There's always a trade-off. Anyone who tells you otherwise is usually selling you something. When a policy is created, it creates new trade-offs, new incentives, and new problems, and sometimes those problems are worse compared to the problems of the past. Then, I know we like to think of ourselves as good people and we have good intent, but we have to assess the actual behavior which a policy will incentivize. For example, a lot of people think that rent control controls the rent. They just listen to the name. They don't look beyond that. When you look at it from a historical perspective, because it's been tried many times, often rent control raises the rent. So the intent means absolutely zero. In the states that have rent control, usually 90% of the time, 99% of the time have higher rent. There's many reasons for that. This is why you should learn economics or just read up on it, because it will be much harder to trick you. And I'll give you another example of what I mean by incentives and unintended consequences. So in India, I believe it was in India, at some point the government started paying people to bring in poisonous snakes because they're trying to reduce poisonous snake population because it was dangerous. Then the incentive that created is that people started breeding poisonous snakes and selling it to the government. It became like their new hustle. The government found out about this, and since their quota was met, they stopped paying people. And instead of reducing the snake population, the people that were breeding the snakes, they released the snakes into the wild and into the cities, which at the end of the day increased the poisonous snake population. That is the unintended consequences. So to review, 1, realize that good intentions means absolutely zero. 2, understand that every policy creates new incentives. 3, understand that there is unintended consequences. Next, understand that with new policy, because there's new incentives, new problems will be created that most people don't realize or think about. Sometimes those problems are much worse. And lastly, understand that there's almost never a solution. There's always a trade-off. Anyone who tells you otherwise is usually selling you something, like a politician who just wants to get elected. And once they get elected, they do not care. And next, I would encourage you to just read up on basic economics, because economics does not necessarily have to do with just numbers. It has to do with human nature. And people who like psychology, I think, would also like learning about economics, because you start to think about how will people react, and you can look into the past history and be able to predict it pretty well for the most part. But if you want to be tricked and be a pawn on the board, then please do not listen to anything to what I have to say, and please continue being a pawn in someone's life. If you want to be a pawn, do not listen to anything that I just said. Completely ignore it.